2023 NFL season has come to a close, but that means that for many teams, the offseason has just begun. And so NFL Black Monday, where coaches usually get the axe right after the day after they don't make the playoffs, well, that day has come and went, and Joe and I are here to give our reactions and the possible implications of these moves for these teams.
Hike!
So, Joe, let's first talk about a head coach that was somewhat of a surprise. There was rumors that he may be on the way out, and that's head coach Mike Vrabel. He's no longer the head coach of the Tennessee Titans. What do you make of this move, Joe? What do you think is going to happen with the Titans going forward?
Yeah, I was surprised that they just straight up fired him. I was expecting them to get traded, or maybe he just leaves himself. But I think it makes sense, right? They said they didn't want it to take too much time trying to trade him. They want to get into this coaching search, figure out who the future coach is. So I think it makes sense why they fired him. But I still think, I don't know. I don't know if it's the right move or not. I think Vrabel's a really good head coach. He's always, I feel like one of those coaches that does more with less talent than they have. And I think it's going to be tough for somebody to come in there. They're not in the best, case. We don't know, is Will Levis their franchise quarterback or not? Derrick Henry's gone. Tannehill's going to be gone. Their defense doesn't have that much talent either. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Tennessee Titans do going forward.
I agree with you. I don't really understand why they did this move. I think it was a mutual parting of ways. I think that's the only way I could describe it, because if you look at it, his record was pretty good. He had a 54-45 record. I want to say he was a coach of the year at one point, led the team to the AFC Championship game at one point. I believe he also has made the playoffs 3 years. I mean, he's one of the better coaches out there right now. So for them to decide to part ways, I do read between the lines a little bit. I do think, even though, the media will spin whatever they want to spin, but I do think Rand Carthan, the GM, and him, I think there might have been some rub there. I mean, why would the owner say, in her statement that I want to have more, was it collaboration, or I want to have better, cooperation, within the overall, business structure? I mean, that alludes to the fact that things were not, in a good place, I feel like.
Yeah, and I think, Vrabel himself even alluded to it just in October when he went back to Foxborough for him getting entered in, I think, to the Ring of Honor, I believe.
Yeah.
And with the Patriots, and talking about, just how special a place is and how well the organization is run. And I think that was alluding to just the turmoil he had with the Tennessee Titans and the issues he potentially has with how things are running with the organization.
And he's going to be a very coveted coach. I think, we'll mention this, going forward here, because until he gets hired, but I think Vrabel to the Patriots makes too much sense. I don't know where else would make as much sense. Maybe like a team like the Falcons. I don't know. There's no teams that jump out of my mind. I mean, the Patriots is an obvious fit.
Yeah, the Patriots. I also, I think I could see the Commanders going to somebody like Vrabel, new ownership. They want to make a splash. He's a name. He's, highly respected around the league. As you see, just everyone, going on social media and Twitter and things, just saying how surprised they are that Tennessee's moving on from him, and the fact that Tennessee's going to regret this. So I think there's somebody to look out for, and who knows, maybe the Falcons as well. They just had a lot of times you kind of look, if you got an offensive guy, you fire them, you kind of go to the opposite side of the ball. That could be Vrabel.
Well, and then the only other thing I can think of is maybe the Raiders, because Tom Brady is a part of the ownership group with Mark Davis. So, obviously you've got the ties of playing together. I think it's a little bit of a stretch, but it's a possibility.
Yeah, as far as the Raiders just look like either Antonio Pierce or Harbaugh at this point, but who knows, maybe somebody like Vrabel also entices them.
I think the Titans' destination might be one of the worst jobs, other than maybe Carolina, which we'll talk about. Rand Carthan as a GM, I think, is a fine GM. It's too early yet to say. But coming into that organization, we talked about how that roster from a cap space standpoint was really in rough shape. Then they went ahead and they signed DeAndre Hopkins, but in my view, Hopkins is gone. There's no way they bring him back. I mean, this is a rebuilding team. And if that coaching staff, whoever comes in, is not a supporter of the likes of Will Levis, Treylon Burks, I just don't know what building blocks they truly have. I mean, they've got guys like Jeffrey Simmons, Harold Landry comes to mind on the defensive side of the ball. But, I mean, they just don't really have a lot going for them right now. They trade Kevin Byard, their long-term safety there. I don't know. I think this Titans job, I think the Titans are in my view, going to be the bottom of the AFC South, the surging AFC South for the next, few years here.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, no doubt about it, they have the worst quarterback too. And it's tough to compete when you don't have your quarterback solidified. And the other three, Anthony Richardson, we saw what he could do. Obviously, CJ Stroud leading him to the playoffs. Trevor Lawrence has been a bit inconsistent, but maybe when he's not injured, he figures things out. And then you got, Titans who Will Levis, Malik Willis, who knows?
Next up is the coach with probably the biggest name that really is sort of moving on, maybe not moving on, and that could be the best coach ever in the NFL, which is head coach Bill Belichick of the New England Patriots. We have been kind of having a seesaw affair of whether or not is he going to stay, is he going to go. Sounds like for most people, it sounds like a parting of the ways will be happening for Robert Kraft, the owner of the Patriots and longtime head coach Bill Belichick. Joe, where do you stand? Are we anticipating that Bill is going to be on the move? Do you think he's going to get traded? Is he just going to be, is he going to resign? Or are they just going to mutually part ways? He's going to be a free agent coach. What's in his future?
Yeah, I definitely think, Robert Kraft and the New England Patriots are ready to move on from Bill Belichick. But your question's a good one. I think that is the only question at this point, right? Is does he get traded? Or does he ultimately, too, just force Robert Kraft to actually fire him? I mean, I could also see them, mutually parting ways, but almost wonder if they would have done that by now. But I think the wait is maybe they see if they have any suitors to trade and then figure out, whether they fire him or figure out how to mutually part ways here.
Yeah, one thing that was interesting I heard of is that Bill Belichick never mentions his contract. And at the end of season press conference, he's like, well, I'm still under contract, which it makes you think, is that a veiled comment towards Kraft to say like, well, if you really don't want me, then you're going to have to, be the one to let go of a Hall of Fame coach that's won 6 Super Bowls. Like you're going to, it's like, I'm not going to let you off the hook. I'm not going to make this easy for you. You're going to have to get rid of me if you want to get rid of me.
Right. And that's kind of what I was alluding to, ultimately Belichick forcing Kraft's hand into doing something that he might not want to do out of respect for him and, everything that he's done for that organization. And obviously, the dynasty that they had with Tom Brady and just the, championships they won. And I could see Bill doing that. But yeah, it's to me probably either forcing him to fire Kraft to fire him, or maybe they work out a trade for a desperate team looking for, a coach of his stature.
Well, Broncos, trade away a first-round pick plus to acquire Sean Payton. So you would think that Bill Belichick would be pretty much a similar value, if not more. Could be pretty hard. I can't see a coach getting more than that, but I guess time will tell. I mean, there could be teams that are very desperate.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously, right, that's got to be where the value starts. Whether or not, it goes more than that, I don't know. I just wonder, too, if does the recency, the losing streak, and what's been going on with Bill Belichick and the Patriots, does that, drop his value down any? Obviously, like, it didn't seem to for Sean Payton anyways. But I just wonder if the, recent seasons and the losing seasons they've had might affect that.
So when it comes to Bill Belichick, you and I both are leaning towards him leaving New England, correct?
Yes. Yep.
So with that being said, what do you think happens with this New England Patriots franchise? I mean, it's been under his watchful eye for a very long time. the roster in and of itself, I think, is pretty barren. And honestly, I think under his leadership, they have done very well with a defense that I think is somewhat mediocre. But he has just been the ultimate chess player when it comes to the matchups on defense. So where do the New England Patriots go from here? Do you have any ideas of some coaches that come to mind that you think could wind up in New England?
Well, obviously, somebody who could be interesting does Mike Vrabel. We've seen Mike Vrabel, go to the Patriots on the bye week, sit with Robert Kraft. Just wondering if there's something there. But looking within too, I think Gerard Mayo could be a candidate also to be kind of elevated in that role. He's a guy that is widely considered to be a young head coaching candidate, being that he was a former player of the Patriots. Does he end up getting that job?
Do you also possibly see Josh McDaniels
No,
at play?
I
No.
don't. I don't think he's at play. I think Josh McDaniels. Anyways, this should be the case. He should have run his course and gotten his opportunities for be head coaching. I mean, it just doesn't work.
Oh, it's just interesting, right? The Patriots have had probably argue of all the franchises out there right now in the NFL, probably the most stability over the past, handful of years. So this is going to be the most instability we've seen from them in a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, I
So
think first and foremost, regardless of the coach, they need to get a real GM in there. I think that's another thing that Bill Belichick has really hurt them. He's always been known to be the great coach. Like you said, he's great at getting the defensive matchups and adjustments, taking away the best players, but he's really hurt the Patriots with, their inability to draft a good wide receiver. And, really on the offensive side of the ball, they usually address that during free agency and just haven't been able to hit on those players in the draft.
yeah, I think the tough part when it comes to this team is I just don't feel there's a lot of building blocks on the team. On offense, none come to mind, and not even on the defense either. I want to say even a Kyle Duggar, who's been a good player for them in the back end. I want to say he might even be a free agent this offseason. So there's not a lot of names, but Judon's an older veteran. He's not a guy to build around. Any of these rookies, which honestly, a part of me is a little concerned because I have one of them. But Keon White, Marte Mapu, right? These guys are Patriot, Belichick type players that he was using as Swiss Army knives, kind of unicorns at their position. He just knew how to use them. So it's like, I mean, we got Christian Barmore. I'm trying to think. I just off the top of my head, there's just not really a lot of building blocks for this team.
Yeah, there's really not. I mean, I think you mentioned it. I think Barmore might be one of those guys, but kind of outside of that, you're kind of right. I mean, all these other guys were brought in based on Belichick's system and his ability to, just take guys and fit them into a system and make them play well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Mike Vrabel's the name to watch. Gerard Mayo has been a guy who's been rumored to be there, but there's rumors that he rubs people the wrong way. I also could see Kraft from a loyalty standpoint, possibly pulling a McDaniels. I think it might be more likely than you're making it sound like, because it's one of those things that Kraft hasn't had to do this for a long, long time. So might just want to, get someone more youthful than Belichick, but still try to have that same coaching tree. I don't know. The Patriots are going for a tumultuous offseason, probably the most that it's been in a while, but they do have the number three overall draft pick coming up in a pretty heavy quarterback class. So that will be very interesting to see what happens with New England going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I do think they need to get somebody in there. I still don't think McDaniels is the guy, but I think they need to get somebody in there with an offensive mind and somebody to really try to fix this offense. That's really where the issue is.
So going over to some other coaches that were fired, we saw two that were fired as of Black Monday's reaction. Let's start off with the first one that happened basically a couple ticks off of midnight, which was head coach Arthur Smith of the Atlanta Falcons. So I had a tirade on the field. That was our last memory of Arthur for the Falcons, which I'm sure he probably wishes he could take back as well, even though he was quite heated. Or who knows, maybe he feels justified. But nevertheless, he's no longer the coach. GM Terry Fontenot is staying with the team, is going to help with the head coaching search. Joe, what do you think is the aftermath of this firing? I know you were probably of the few that were somewhat in Arthur Smith's corner thinking that he was a good head coach. What do you think about this?
Well, I mean, I was just looking at it from a non-fantasy perspective, right? And just looking at it strictly football. Now, I always thought that Arthur Smith, was able to get the best out of his players and do more with less talent. Falcons were always competitive the last couple of years while he was there. Didn't ultimately get the job done, but they had to let him go after that. I mean, the way the season ended, but then especially with that Tyree that you mentioned, there's no coming back from that. Um, it'll be interesting to see who the Falcons ultimately bring in, um, and try to fix this thing, and maybe do they get a new quarterback or get somebody to try to develop Ritter?
Well, no, I mean, I think Ritter's done. I don't see. I think we've already seen a sample size of him this past year. Not that you say a year is enough, but I don't think that year showed it. He wasn't. He didn't have high draft capital, and on top of it, he didn't really show much. I mean, he was benched multiple times for Taylor Heineke. It's just a bad situation, and it's one of those things. We talk about the implications of this team. Anytime you have a new regime change, everything gets flown out the window. You got to prove yourself. Doesn't matter if you're a first round pick or a seventh round pick. We talk about this. When it comes to training camp, you were not, they did not draft you. Now, obviously, Terry Fontenot, he's there. But a head coach, he's the one he's doing the X's and O's. So there's no guarantee that because Arthur Smith invested in these guys doesn't mean that the new head coach is going to be investing in them. So I think when it comes down to it, what caused them to go, and we heard about this from owner Arthur Blank, through the grapevine, is that he did not maximize his players. And I agree with 100%. They drafted Bijan Robinson, number 8 overall. They drafted Drake London, number 8 overall. And then they drafted Kyle Pitts, number 4 overall. And they just, none of them, all 3 of them, I think, were underutilized. I understand he was able to get the most out of the likes of Jonnu Smith and Tyler Algier. But these were players that were highly touted out of college, very talented. And I think many people often scratch their head as to why they weren't used enough. So I think this offense, they've had a ton of draft capital allocated to the offense as a whole. So depending on who comes in, I think it could be a pretty exciting group. I think, if you're a Kyle Pitts owner or a, Drake London owner or Bijan Robinson owner, you're elated. At least I would be, just for a fresh start, in my view. But again, they have to prove themselves, and with a new head coach, things could be different. So I guess, who do you think? Any names come to mind that you think make most sense for the Atlanta Falcons here?
Yeah, I mean, aside from the head coach, I mean, you can be elated for those players, but if they don't get a quarterback, those players it's going to be a moot point. As we've seen the disappointment with Desmond Ritter at quarterback and others at the helm, and just them, not being able to get those guys fantasy relevant, regardless if it was Arthur Smith's fault or not. But some things with, I mean, I'm hearing that Bill Belichick's a possible landing spot for Atlanta. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh is rumored everywhere at this point. But aside from that, I mean, I'm sure they're going to look into, try to get Ben Johnson in there and some of the other, hot names around the league.
Yeah, I also think that Dave Canales, if I'm saying his last name correctly, from Tampa Bay, he's done a masterful job as the offensive coordinator with Baker Mayfield. Has really, allowed him to have a career year, which many thought that he was going to be left for dead. Basically he was done for. His career was going to be over. But what he was able to do with Geno Smith, and now what he was able to do with Baker Mayfield, he's a longtime coach for the Seattle Seahawks. I think it could be a really good fit. So, it should be interesting. I agree those other names are interesting. Wonder if, possibly some other coaches that, are kind of in that cycle last year that didn't get hired. You had, Eric Bieniemy. He had a couple interviews last year, did a really good job, I believe, in Washington. It almost makes you wonder, everyone's like, well, Andy Reid's the play caller, but the Chiefs offense does not look the same. So, how Eric Bamby did a really good job, I think, or the best he could with Sam Howell. So he's kind of an interesting name. You have Raheem Morris as well, defensive coordinator for the Rams. So there's a couple guys out there I think that that could be a possibility as well.
Yeah, he's still somebody that's getting looks. I mean, obviously, you mentioned past coaching cycles. Dan Quinn's another guy that's getting a lot of heating up. His name's heating up again for possible landing spots. I don't think it'll be Atlanta, but possibly other places.
Well, didn't he formerly coach Atlanta?
Well, that's what I mean. That's why I was like,
I was gonna say,
I don't think it's
him
going to be
going back,
Atlanta,
yeah.
but I mean, he's just that's another name that's heating up. But I think some of these other vacancies he could be a candidate for.
So the other team that we saw fire their head coach was Ron Rivera, the Washington Commanders. This was highly rumored for quite some time. Made a lot of sense. New owner has come in, a new ownership group. I see a similar, game plan, if you will, or that the Denver Broncos did. Denver Broncos got a new ownership group, and even though Nathaniel Hackett was only there for 1 year, they decided to tear everything off. So, Joe, what's the aftermath and your thoughts as far as the Ron Rivera dismissal?
Yeah, this was this is one of the ones that just wasn't surprised to anybody. Happened right away. They did wait till today. Didn't fire him on his birthday, which was Sunday, which gave him a little bit of the benefit of doubt there. But it's crazy, man. As far as like they just hitting the ground running already. Getting GM candidates in there, looking to interview them, and then firing up the coaching search right away. Requesting, talking to the Lions, looking at Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson to get in there, amongst others as well.
Yeah, it was interesting. So Rick Spielman and former general manager Bob Myers of the Golden State Warriors are helping with the search for the Washington Commanders. And what I find interesting is Chris Spielman, who's Rick Spielman's brother, is a part of the Detroit Lions organization as a senior assistant to the CEO. So I didn't think that was too much of a surprise that once you started connecting the dots, that Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn were one of the first people who were selected as, head coaching candidates. It's just like in the real world. It's all about who you know. There's connections. And so if there is some level of influence there, those two guys are going to get the benefit of the doubt because, his brother Chris could advocate that they could be deserving of a job. So Commanders have been a team that under Rivera that I think has been pretty disappointing. And they also don't have a lot of building blocks, in my view. I mean, Terry McLaurin, you think so?
I think they got a decent. I think they have talent on their roster. I just think they needed better coaching to do more with it. And I think that's where I think it's good that they're targeting an offensive coach. I think they really need one. Ron Rivera, he never really had the longevity there. He was literally just brought in to control the locker room, settle things down after, everything going on with the previous owner until they got new ownership to kind of shift things. So he was the perfect guy to just weather the storm and, settle things down and make, keep them somewhat relevant as, they were able to make the playoffs just a couple of years ago.
I'm going to push back with you on that. I don't really know why you feel they have a lot of talent. I mean, what comes to mind for me is Terry McLaurin. He's been a veteran there for quite some time. He's a pretty talented player. Dotson's been a disappointment, and he'll be a retread because the former regime drafted him, and he hasn't really showed very much. Antonio Gibson's a free agent. Brian Robinson, how does he get involved in the new coaching staff? No quarterback on the roster. Offensive line, to my knowledge, is pretty bare bones. On the defensive side, you got Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne. Those are two guys you could definitely build upon. But their secondary is in pretty rough shape. I'm pretty sure Cameron Curl is going to be a free agent. And then I'm trying to think off the top of my head, linebackers, Yamin Davis, he's been a bust. So I don't, and then Emmanuel Forbes was sort of a disappointment, and he was kind of seen as this Josh Norman type of cornerback that was going to do really well with the tutelage and coaching of Ron Rivera. So to me, I don't really feel that they have a lot to build upon.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned they have talent on their offense and their wide receiver position. at the skill positions. If they get some better quarterback play, better coaching, a lot of that can change pretty fast. And yeah, Forbes was a rookie. It takes some time for guys to develop. Not everyone just comes right out of the gate and plays well.
Anybody that comes off the top of your head as far as who could be the next Commanders coach?
Well, Bill Belichick's rumored here. It'll be interesting to see if Eric Bieniemy gets a look. I think he deserves it. I do think they should go with a guy on the offensive side of the ball, because that's where I feel like they're going to need somebody to develop a quarterback, create some creativity for this offense, and as you know, that's where their main pieces are that they have. So I think it's good that they're looking at Ben Johnson. I think they need somebody like that, or keep it with Bieniemy. But if they don't go with Bieniemy, or if somebody else doesn't hire him, it'll be interesting to see if he doesn't go back to Kansas City and try to fix that offense.
I think he could get a head coaching job this cycle, though.
We'll see. I mean, everyone's been saying that the last few years that he should, and just hasn't for whatever reason.
As far as names, I think this is going to be a similar storyline that the Broncos had. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. I see them going after a big fish. I see him, whether it's Bill Belichick, we talked a little bit about Jim Harbaugh. I think they're going to go for a big name, whether maybe it is Ben Johnson. Maybe they spend a ton of money on Ben Johnson, because I think he was rumored to wanting like 10 or 15 million a year, which I think is sort of outrageous for really kind of an unproven offensive coordinator. The other one that was kind of interesting is that I think his name is Bobby Slovic from the Houston Texans. He's an offensive coordinator for them, has done really well with CJ Stroud. He could be another candidate that I think could get a lot of buzz.
Yeah, you were right the first time, Slowick, and yeah, wouldn't surprise me if he gets a look. Just another guy from that Shanahan coaching tree that everyone kind of likes to pick from, and D'Amico Ryans brought him over from San Fran and to be on his staff and be the offensive coordinator.
So are you enjoying this video so far? Well, if you are, show your support to our new channel by hitting the subscribe button and liking this video. We'll be creating videos all NFL season long, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. So there were 3 coaches that were fired during the season, and we'll start with the earliest one, which was Josh McDaniels, fired by the Las Vegas Raiders, who was then replaced by interim head coach Antonio Pierce, a former linebacker of the Giants, took over as the head coach. Really has become a lightning rod for the Raiders. And based on the rumors that you hear, it sounds like Antonio Pierce might retain this job, and the only other candidate possibly in the running could be Jim Harbaugh. So, Joe, what's your take on the Raiders? Where do they go from here?
Yeah, well, selfishly, not only Michigan fan but also Broncos fan, I really don't want to see Harbaugh go there, to face the Broncos. But it does look like those 2 guys. I mean, people in the locker room, the fans are, clamoring for Antonio Pierce. They're shouting AP after their win in the final game against the Broncos. It'll be interesting if we get to look, but yeah, Mark Davis is rumored to be heavily involved in Jim Harbaugh, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I think ultimately it would be interesting if the Raiders decide to keep Antonio Pierce, because I feel like they made the mistake of letting Rich go the last time they had an interim coach, and he was a lightning rod. Guys in the locker room really liked him. Then they go with, chasing a name and McDaniels, and it just kind of faltered, and here they are in the coaching search again. But at the same time, I think it'd be a little nerve-wracking going with Pierce for the full season. Just because he's like unproven, but he has jolted that bolt of lightning and got the most out of his players, and the players love him. Just don't know if it'd be interesting to see what his staff, he'd bring together and what would happen, I guess.
Yeah, you're referencing Rich Bisaccia, who was an interim coach that took over for John Gruden. I don't know. I think it makes sense to retain Pierce. That whole locker room is behind him. You've got leaders in the locker room, Max Crosby and Devontae Adams, who are extremely vocal, who say this guy needs to be the coach. You do not want to cause a mutiny on your hands. And honestly, Mark Davis is spending so much money. He's paying John Gruden and Josh McDaniels.
Yeah.
For all the money that he still owes them on their coaching contracts, even though they're not coaches for him anymore. So I could see him saying, let me pay Antonio Pierce a little bit less and see how next year goes. instead of opening up my wallet again and paying for another top head coach. But it's just, you don't see it very often that an interim coach becomes, the permanent head coach.
Right.
So time will tell on that. I do believe the rumors. I think it's going to be either one of those two options. I wouldn't be surprised if it's Pierce, but it is the Raiders, so who knows?
Yeah. I mean, if there was a team to retain the interim coach, I feel like it would be the Raiders.
I do think it would be good for if from a fantasy perspective, if you had Raiders players or just the Raiders in general, for their players to be so behind him and he's such a player's coach, I wouldn't be as concerned per se of, this head coach coming in and having a different philosophy of what he wants to do with the team. Like, it's sort of like he's just taken over the team and has made it his own. So to me,
Right.
I feel like it would just be kind of resume with what we have and maybe make some improvements here and there. But it's not it's kind of like when you patch a roof, if you got your leaks in your roof, you kind of patch it up. It's not a complete tear off, So I think that there's a difference there with Antonio Pierce.
Yeah, especially if you bring a guy like Jim Harbaugh in there. He's a tough coach. He's a hard coach. Demands a lot of his players, and that ultimately grew thin over time with the 49ers, despite them being so good. The players just kind of had enough of the grueling type of coaching style he has. So, I mean, it could be a drastic difference for them going from a guy that they really like in Antonio Pierce to a guy like Jim Harbaugh.
Next, we have the Carolina Panthers. They fired Frank Reich. They also cleaned house. Scott Fittier is no longer the GM as well. Joe, what do you make of this Carolina Panthers team, which in my view, and I think in most of the NFL, is somewhat of a mess with owner David Tepper, who by the day, it seems like his stock and people's perception of him just keeps to be dwindling and dwindling and dwindling.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a tough situation to be in. A lot of it because of Tepper as the owner. He's so desperate to win and he just wants to win so bad that it's a negative at this point. He's just not just giving up on people too quickly. At some point you need some continuity. I don't know, we don't know if Bryce Young is going to be the franchise quarterback for the Panthers. Then you got him himself. He's throwing alcohol on fans and getting fined. It's just really not a good look. And I don't know that he's going to need to hire, a good GM. I think he needs a little less involvement as well. And just take a step back and let somebody, help him from a football side of thing. I think he's a good businessman, but he needs somebody that really knows football and can help him in that.
Well, you got to remember, I believe Tepper comes from like Steelers roots.
Yeah.
And so as a result, he's used to the Steelers winning ways. And so he wants the same for the Panthers. So like you said,
Right.
he's just trying too hard. This job is very undesirable to me. I'm very shocked by the firing of Frank Reich. I mean, you could say he rightfully deserved it. I mean, obviously the team was underperforming extremely. I do believe the spin that Tepper was wanting Bryce Young, and the rumor has it that Frank Reich wanted C.J. Stroud. I do believe that the owner might have forced that one, which, I mean, it might have been a 1A, 1B scenario. I just am very concerned for this franchise because you're going to have to find a head coach that wants to pair up with Bryce Young because they're not going to move away from him. They can't. It's just too soon to do that. They traded the farm for him. They're not going to – they would have the number 1 overall pick if they had their pick, and it's going to go to the Bears. So it's a complete botch, but in my view, you can't view it as a sunk cost yet. And so who's going to want to partner with the Panthers on this? I don't know. I mean, you have a guy like Ben Johnson, who's a young offensive mind. I don't know who, I don't know. I really don't know who, I mean, Tepper might have to pay a lot of money. I don't know. I wonder if it's just going to be something wild. Maybe it's even like a guy like, I don't know, even like a guy like John Gruden. I don't know. Something like way out in left field, someone who, has had experience, with on an offensive side to really kind of bring the best out of, a quarterback like that. I don't know what he's going to do.
Yeah, I'm not sure what he's going to do either. I think he's going to have to overpay somebody because it's not a desirable job. He reminds me kind of he's kind of tough to work with from a coach perspective. I feel like kind of like Jerry Jones. He puts a lot of pressure on his head coaches. And I feel like that's what Tepper is going to do as well. It's a pressure situation. And I feel like it's probably going to have to be somebody that's young and upcoming and just wants their shot at a head coaching position. And Tepper's probably going to throw a bunch of money at him. But I think it's interesting. Like I said, I think he needs to lessen his involvement from a GM perspective. But he said that he's not really willing to do that. And that's he said they won't be going after Jim Harbaugh because he's not really willing to relinquish some control. And I think that's part of the problem. Just stay the owner, relinquish some control to people that know football, because that's who you need on your side right now. And they need somebody who can kind of clean this mess up, who knows football in and out, and need somebody that's going to obviously get the best out of Bryce Young moving forward.
Yeah, and when it comes to building blocks on a team, I just don't know what they have. I thought the receivers, I thought there were promise there. None of them really looked all that good. Offensive line's in complete shambles. I mean, I like Derek Brown, I like Brian Burns, but not a lot of building blocks on this team.
No, and I think that maybe they can kind of move those guys to get some picks back so that they can start getting some building blocks on this team. Because I think building through free agency ain't going to help them. They need some draft picks, to go ahead and shore up some of these positions they're weak at. But it's also tough when you don't even have your own number one pick this year.
Lastly, the third head coach that was fired during the season was head coach Brandon Staley, the LA Chargers. You and I both believe that was long overdue. Should have been fired after the debacle against the Jaguars in the wild card round, where he just let that lead slip away. What do you think happens here with the Chargers? The aftermath of his firing. I mean, you and I both believe that Giff Smith is not going to retain that head coaching job. It's a completely different situation than the Raiders. Where do you think the Chargers go from here?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, right now the hottest name, once again, no surprise, it's Jim Harbaugh. And obviously he's got connection from him playing there, and as in his days as a player. I don't know, like that's the hottest name I hear. I don't really know who else that they're potentially looking at or want to bring in.
Well, I think the rumor has been that Spanos, the owner, doesn't spend a lot of money. So is he going to open his checkbook to pay a guy like Harbaugh? Although I do think that Harbaugh, it's one of those things where it's like it's an appealing job because you have Herbert, but you got to like Herbert. Is Herbert your quarterback that you want to hitch your wagon to? So that's one question. But the other part of it is like salary cap space is a mess. Now that can get reworked and turned around, but I don't expect it to be turned around overnight. And honestly, a Chargers organization would probably benefit from the likes of Harbaugh because he is kind of a no-nonsense discipline where I feel like under Staley, things were just sloppy.
Well, that's the problem with the Chargers. It's always, I mean, there's the old adage of the Chargers are going to Charger. I mean, they've been known to be an undisciplined football team, and for them to just kind of implode and beat themselves.
Ever since Marty Schottenheimer, Joe.
Yeah. I mean, it's been that way for quite a while now. So I do think they need somebody like Jim Harbaugh to completely change that around. And maybe this is the time that the Chargers finally open up their wallet and try to prove to people that they're looking to change and they're done being the cheap organization. And I think, being in LA now, I mean, we see other LA teams spend big money and kind of get that return and popularity. If they start spending a little more and open up their wallets, do they get the return and love back in LA essentially?
He's a culture setter, Jim Harbaugh is.
Yeah.
So I think he of most coaches, I think makes a lot of sense for the Chargers.
Yeah, I mean, I think Chargers, like how the Broncos were last year, they really just need somebody to come in there and change around the culture, change around the vibes in the locker room, and somebody to kind of try to bring a winning culture into that locker room again.
Yeah, and I think when it comes down to the team, it doesn't bode well, I believe, with Tom Telesco also getting removed from as a general manager. I mentioned the cap space. Guys like, I don't know if guys like Keenan Allen and Khalil Mack, are going to be back. Joey Bosa, I think, is past his prime. And we've got players that are good, like Derwin James, Asante Samuel Jr. You've got a couple players that I think they can. There are some building blocks there. Mike Williams never stays healthy. Quentin Johnson looked somewhat of a bust. New regime change. He doesn't catch on. He could become irrelevant. Austin Eckler, a free agent. This team is going to be a very different looking team next year.
Yeah, it really will. I mean, you mentioned that. It'll be interesting to see how they address free agency and the draft. Probably more so the draft. Like you said, they're in, cap trouble, but obviously they can, like you said, they can move things around and kind of create that space as well.
It's definitely a team I'm going to monitor because I think there's going to be a lot of change with that organization and how it's going to impact players. More so, honestly, probably the most, other than maybe, I think the most because they're the more relevant players. I think the Patriots and the Commanders are going to do a lot of difference too. Falcons not as much, but I don't know. I just think it's going to be interesting what happens with the Chargers.
Yeah, one thing I thought was interesting was the fact that they didn't give the interim job to Kellen Moore and give him a look. They decided to do that and go with another interim guy. But kind of would have thought it would be interesting for them to take a look at Kellen Moore if they thought he was a potential head coaching candidate for him and give him at least a shot.
Well, rumor has it he declined it because he did not want a poor performance by him to affect his ability to possibly become a head coach one day.
That makes sense because he was another hot name, in the last coaching cycle.
So, Joe, let's do a little rapid fire here. We've only seen a few coaches so far. We thought there'd be a lot more. I'm going to throw out a couple names. You can either say that they're going to stay or go. So let's start off with Mike Vrabel. How about Matt Eberflus?
He's going to stay.
Definitely going to stay.
Yep, I think so. I would have a few weeks ago probably would have told you he'd be gone, but I just think despite the final game not going the Bears' way, just the way they ended the season after getting swept, their defense changed drastically. So I think he'll stay.
Luke Getz, the offensive coordinator, was fired. Haven't heard anything about Eberflus. Thought he would get fired, but he's not. So I agree. I think he is going to stay. I think it could be a mistake, but I think he is going to stay.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the right call or not, but he did get the players to start playing a little bit better. I think the more interesting part there is going to be what do they do with Justin Fields and will he be the quarterback?
How about Mike McCarthy? Cowboys get bounced wild card round and Mike McCarthy gets fired.
I think if they don't make a run in the playoffs, he's going to be gone.
Wow.
So I think the Packers could beat him in the wild card, but I'd say if he doesn't even make it I'm going to say they don't make it to the championship game, and he's probably going to go.
I think he stays. Jerry Jones was super patient with Jason Garrett for a number of years. Dak, I think, had a career year. I don't see that. I think he'll be happy with what happened, and obviously he wants a Super Bowl, but I think he'll see progress. So I don't think he'll get fired.
Interesting. I almost wonder, if they do move on from McCarthy, do they themselves just promote Dan Quinn to head coach to keep him there? I know that Jerry Jones also likes him.
That definitely could be. I could see that happening if they were to do it. How about Nick Sirianni of the Eagles? Philadelphia is a tough place to coach, and things are going really soured over there.
They are. But I think he'll stay. Ultimately, I know that's harsh. They, let go of Peterson even though he won a Super Bowl there. But I just who are the Eagles going to hire that's going to be better than Sirianni at this point? And to me, he's handled being in Philly pretty well.
I agree. I don't think he's going to be going anywhere. The guy went to the Super Bowl last year. You can't fire a guy who went to the Super Bowl last year.
If any team's going to do it, though, it would be this organization and with an unsettled fan base.
Well, if nothing else, it told me that Jonathan Gannon and Shane Steichen meant way more to that organization than I thought. I thought Sirianni was the guy. And, it just goes to show you lose both your coordinators, it's going to hurt, and it hurt bad.
Yeah, that's what happens when you make it to the Super Bowl. You become the hot team to, lose players and coordinators, and the latter happened to them.
How about Mike McDaniel? Rumor has it that if he gets bounced round 1, he will be fired.
That's interesting. I think he'll stay, even though there's a good chance that they do get bounced round 1. Arrowhead's a tough place to play, despite the Chiefs being in a down year. But again, I mean, just what he's been able to do with Tua and his team, they've been really ravaged by injuries this year. I don't know. I think they gotta stay with him.
I'm with you. I can't see why they would fire him. I mean, he's made the Dolphins way more relevant that they've had in a very long time. I think that'd be a really big mistake if they do that.
Yeah, I think once again, it's just like you fire Mike McDaniel. Who else are you going to get? I mean, he's led the dynamic offense. They made big plays. Yeah, I think they got to stay with him.
Joe, any other coaches that come to mind that you think are going to get the axe that I have not mentioned?
Maybe not get the axe, but I think Mike Tomlin's somebody to watch. He's got 1 year left on his deal, and does he decide to either take a year off from football, kind of like what Sean Payton did, or does he maybe try to almost force his way out of Pittsburgh? Maybe a trade or something.
That's interesting. I mean, he definitely is. There's a lack of love for him, which I think is a mistake. I think he's one of the best head coaches out there. I mean, the way he that Steelers team is a constant, in my view, not talented team, and he overperforms that roster every year.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he's never had a losing season is really just a remarkable accomplishment. And when last year it looked like for sure he was going to have his first losing season, and somehow they get to 500, and somehow this year they're 10-7 and in the playoffs, because I'm just like watching them and I'm just like, this is not a playoff team.
No, not at all. And when it comes to the other coaches around the league, we've heard Robert Saleh is safe. We've heard that Dennis Allen is safe. Most likely Todd Bowles will be safe because he made the playoffs. So a lot of teams that we're possibly thinking Pete Carroll is coming back. He's not going to be retiring. So, I think those were some of the other coaches that were on the hot seat.
Yeah, I think the Saints not moving on from Dennis Allen could be a mistake. I think they just need, not to say he's a bad coach, but I think he's just a better coordinator, and really feel like they need to get, an offensive coach to, get their car to play better and try to make things work with him and try to bolster that offense a little bit.
I don't disagree with you. I mean, I think he's just a middle of the road coach.
Right.
Don't think he's a guy who could really. He's not a Mike Tomlin, right? He's not gonna cause your team to win more games because of his leadership. So to me, I mean, those guys don't grow on trees either, but I don't think Dennis Allen has been impressive either.
Yeah. So how about your Bills? Sean McDermott still a guy that's getting rolled around with his Bills possibly moving on from him, or do you think that's tampered down now that they got the 2 seed?
No, I think Sean McDermott's safe. You saw, based on that news story that came out around surrounding 9/11 and kind of a tongue-in-cheek comment that he made regarding that. You saw even Brandon Beane, kind of, the general manager, who I think is one of the best in the league, really voices support for him. And rumor would have it that Terry Pagula, the owner of the Buffalo Bills, is very supportive of Sean McDermott. And now that we just got the 2 seed, I mean, the season was rocky, very topsy-turvy. We're able to get the 2 seed. More than likely, I would think we're going to get at least to the wild card round against the Steelers. I know you want results to get to the Super Bowl, but honestly, I think it took a lot of leadership on his part to do what they did the past 5 games and kind of block out the noise. So I think as a result, I don't think they'll be moving off from him.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, even though I think they possibly should move on from him.
I know you do. I'm torn on that. I think he should stay.
Yeah. Oh, I think ultimately, I think kind of like Dennis Allen, like I don't know if he's really elevating the team, and it's like you're winning games because of Sean McDermott, at the end of the day.
You're not wrong. Lastly, rumors are rumbling your Michigan Wolverines just won the national championship under Jim Harbaugh. Does Jim Harbaugh make the jump? Will he be a head coach in 2024? for the NFL.
Yeah, I was going to say NFL head coach. I really hope that he comes back and stays with Michigan, be that true Michigan man. But I know that now that he just won the national championship, that checks another box for him of accomplishments. And I think he still has a burning desire to win the Super Bowl in the NFL. He came so close and lost against his brother. So I think potentially if somebody throws around enough money for him and entices him enough, I think he possibly will go to the NFL this offseason.
Yeah, I think he's going to the NFL. I think, you won't hear from him. He's not the type that would kind of voice this in the media. I believe he's more of a private person, but he has been however you view all of the antics and all the, stuff, everything that's gone, allegations, everything that's gone on around him, trying the stealing, and then him getting suspended early on for the recruiting type of stuff. I just think that he is tired of dealing with, the BCS or the NCAA, excuse me, and everything that's going on with them. I think he just wants to coach in football. And I think like you said, he wants to win on the big stage. He wanted to go back to Michigan to win the national championship. He accomplished his goal. And I think now he'll go back to the NFL.
Yeah, I do think he's sick and tired of the NCAA and their rules and the, potential punishment or sanctions that he's going to have that, this coming up. That could play a big part. Maybe he waits. He's a quirky, interesting guy. That part of me thinks like just because the media puts it out there that he's going to leave, that maybe he doesn't. But I think if the sanctions are there and they're just too much, I think I could see him going to the NFL and just being, look, I'm so sick of the NCAA and all this that they've, done to him and suspended what they've suspended him for. And, just say, look, I've had enough. I'm going back to the NFL.
So that was our reaction to NFL Black Monday. Was not overly eventful, but there were some things that happened, and Joe and I definitely did a little spinning around as far as speculation goes, is what we think could be happening here in the next few days. Going forward, we're going to be talking about the coaching carousel when these guys actually end up, getting signed, what these new head coaches look like, what these teams, and what it could mean for these teams going forward. So you're not going to want to miss that. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.